standard American diet is absolutely atrocious for the gut.
Today's guest has spent over 20 years building health and supplement companies. He's a microbiologist, a researcher, and the driving force behind some of the most trusted gut health supplements in the world, including Just Thrive, where he is the lead in scientific development.
If you look at people with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, if you have IBS, somewhere around 60% of people with IBS have diagnosed mood disorders, right? Anxiety and depression.
What would you say is the biggest lie that Big Pharma has sold us about our health?
We started thinking about
what protocol should someone go on when they're taking antibiotics to help save their gut?
I've discovered a compound. If you take enough of this compound, it will reduce your risk of dying from anything by 45 to 50%.
I'm Radhi and on my podcast, A Really Good Cry, we embrace the real, the messy, and the beautiful, providing a space for raw, unfiltered conversations that celebrate vulnerability and allow you to tune in to learn, connect, and find comfort together. Kiran, thank you so much for being here on A Really Good Cry. I am so excited to get into the conversation. How are you feeling today? Are you feeling good?
I'm feeling amazing.
Great,
yes,
great.
I love it.
Well, I have to say, Just Thrive Probiotics, I know you do so many other supplements there, but Just Thrive Probiotics have been the best ones that I've ever tried. My gut thanks you very much for that. And I'm so excited to get into a conversation all about how people can heal their gut. It's one of the questions I get the most in the DMs. And I think people really enjoy learning the details. And I know you are the person for that.
Yes, I'm the biggest gut nerd.
Are you? Amazing.
I hope you've had on the program. So
great.
I'm excited to talk.
I would love to know why you decided to go into gut health. I want to start there.
Yeah, so I'm trained as a microbiologist.
Okay.
My parents are both scientists of sorts. My mom's a medical doctor. My dad was a microelectronics engineer. And he was like the innovation side, the systems engineering side.
Yeah.
He's had, over 250 US patents in his name for inventing stuff in microchips and all that. And then my mom is the clinical science side. And I think I got a little bit of a mix of both, right? So I love the clinical science. That's where my passion is, but I bring kind of a systems thinking to it.
Yeah.
And so when I was in college, I was trying to figure out what am I going to study? Like any good Indian kid, I should be pre-med, of course.
Yeah,
so
of course.
I was pre-med already, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to study. And so the first week in college, I watched this movie called Outbreak.
Okay.
Right. So for those that aren't as old as me, that's an old school movie with Morgan Freeman and Dustin Hoffman. And it was about like a little epidemic that breaks out in a small town.
Okay.
And then the people that were solving the problem were these microbiologists and virologists from the CDC and other places. And they were trying to chase these viruses down and figure out a cure of it and all that. So I thought that was super exciting. So I went into the world of microbiology. And that became a massive passion for me because what you start to realize when you study the world of microbes is that it's an invisible thing around you, but it affects every aspect of your life, right? It's like the quantum mechanics of biology. And so then I started, actually there was a definitive moment. So in the world of microbiology, you end up studying pathogens a lot, right? And then I was interviewed for this program called U.S. News and World Report, and they had asked me the question, what percentage of microbes are actually harmful, right? So I said, you know what? I never really thought about that. Let me dig into it a little bit. Got into the research on it and started realizing that at best, it's around 0.1%.
No way.
Right? 0.1%.
Wow.
At best. And that's like me being very generous with it. So 99.9% of microbes ever discovered are either benign or beneficial. But we put so much emphasis on that 0.1% that can cause illness or disease. And then it started to click like, wait a minute, the best way to control the 0.1% that is problematic is to allow the 99.9% to flourish, right?
Makes sense.
They do a way better job of it than we can.
Yeah.
And so that was a gap in the clinical, scientific, microbiology, medicine world. And I was like, how do I study that 99.9%? How do I build a career in that? Shortly after that, the Human Microbiome Project kicked off, which was the project by the NIH to study this complex ecosystem that we have within us. Really, it's the study of the 99.9%.
Amazing.
And so I was like, that's it. That's what I'm doing, right? So I dove headfirst in 15, 18 years ago and haven't looked back since.
It's so interesting how even in research, you always end up focusing on the things which I was like, how do we kill the bad things and forget to think, how do we actually support and nourish and help the good things flourish, which is what you're focusing on. My mum's a microbiologist, actually.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
But in all the research that you've done, you said you've been doing it for nearly 15 years now. What was the most surprising thing that you found out about the gut?
Number one, I think the big theme is how impactful the gut is to everything that happens in our body. We've always obviously understood that the gut is important for digestion. And then maybe the assimilation of nutrients has an impact on everything else. But now what we're really coming to understand is that the gut is a central command center for how the rest of the body works and functions. And it's also the largest reservoir of our functionality. Right? So let me elaborate on what that means, right? So if we look at genetics, we've always known that genetics codes for proteins and other functions, right? So we're like, okay, everything that happens in our body is coded for by genetics. We look at our own genome, we've got about 22,000 functional genes. And it may sound like a lot, but an earthworm has 30,000 functional genes.
No way.
Right? A cockroach has 21 or 22,000 functional genes. So we're not all that much more sophisticated than a cockroach is. And that's crazy to think, because then you go, well, how are we so complex, right? How are we at the top of the evolutionary ladder? How are we at the top of the food chain? Well, as it turns out, we have over 2.5 microbial genes in our system. Right? This is largely in the gut where the vast majority of microbes are. And we use so much of that genetic capability to function as humans. Which means we have to reset how we think of ourselves. We are no longer this collection of skin and bones with organs that are connected through tubes and so on, right? We are a walking, talking rainforest. We are a beautiful, elegant, biological ecosystem that has been organized with painstaking, effort through nature to function in a particular way. And there's a term for that. It's called holobiont. Holobiont is a super organism. Right? So we're a walking, talking rainforest, and we're made up of thousands of little microecologies that have to work together to afford the health and function of the whole. As we keep thinking about humans as an ecosystem, we become a little more conscious about what we do to our ecosystem.
What do you think are like the top 3 things that people are doing that are ruining their gut at the moment? Because I find everyone has gut issues. Like every other person I meet is struggling with something that relates, like you said, back to the gut. So what do you think are the main things that people are doing that are really irritating or ruining people's gut health?
Yeah, I would say if I could list probably 10 that are really significant, but if I were to list the top 3 or 4, right? I would say number 1 is our really poor diet, right? We have a very low diversity in our diet. The standard American diet is absolutely atrocious for the gut for a few reasons. Number 1 is that we eat very calorically dense, nutritionally poor foods. Those nutritional elements in natural foods like polyphenols and carotenoids, all the colored fruits and vegetables and all those, right, are critically important as sources of food for the microbes in our system. Fiber becomes such a critical component. So the standard American diet has around 8 grams of fiber per day, which is really, really low. Right? And we should talk about the impact of fiber.
Definitely.
Actually. Just something so simple as that. So our diet is heavily processed and very low in diversity. The second thing is our overuse of medications, antibiotics, right? For example, and antibiotics can save lives. They're needed at times, but even the CDC estimated about a decade ago that at least half of the antibiotic prescriptions are unnecessary. They're written for viral infections and other things, right? Those have a devastating effect on our ecosystem. And number 3, this may be surprising, is stress. So stress induces a significant amount of dysfunction in our ecosystem through a number of mechanisms. One mechanism, which I'll elaborate on, is so there are pathogens within our system. We talked about that 0.1%, right? Now, they hang out and often are functional when they're controlled by the 99%. But many of them are what we call opportunistic, meaning they sit there and they wait for the right opportunity to really rear their ugly heads or the bad parts about them. And so stress is a thing that they sit and sense. When the host's cortisol or epinephrine and norepinephrine is high, indicating the host is under stress, that's when these microbes go, aha, the host is compromised. This is when we can proliferate, right? So then they start throwing off their toxins and they start multiplying and they start taking over more real estate and they increase their percentage within the ecosystem, which then can cause more disruption as well. So stress in itself can be a really, really big driver of dysfunction and dysbiosis.
Tell me more about antibiotics, because I have avoided antibiotics like the plague for a while now since I heard about it. Tell me what they do to the gut. And then also if someone has to go on antibiotics, if they feel like they have no other choice, the doctor's like, you have to take this, otherwise you're going to get this, this, and this. What protocol should someone go on when they're taking antibiotics to help save their gut?
Yeah. So here's what an antibiotic does. It's a little bit like an atom bomb for your gut, right? So if you think about your gut is loaded with all of these microbes, trillions of microbes. Right. When the antibiotic goes in, most antibiotics will stay in the small bowel for about 2.5 to 3 hours before it ends up in your liver. The compounds within the antibiotics end up in the liver and then distributed throughout circulation. That 2.5, 3 hour period when it's in the gut, it's killing everything down.
Oh, right.
So there was one study out of Stanford, and I can't remember if it got published or not, but I saw it during a research conference. They were presenting on it. What they showed is that, let's say you take all the microbes in your gut, this amazing population, you throw in a high dose of antibiotics, it knocks everything down by 90 to 95%.
Whoa.
Everything, right? So effectively,
good and bad.
Good and bad. Everything gets knocked down, like almost equally. Now, the thing about microbes is they're super resilient, so they start coming back after a few hours. The problem is what proportion they come back in. Right? So the good stuff is still there, but each dose of antibiotics increases the propensity of the dysfunctional microbes to come back faster, right? And here's why. So one of the features of the gut is the pH control. Right? So your gut is supposed to be more acidic than basic or neutral, right? So if you think about your small bowel, the pH can go anywhere from like 2.5 where it's close to the stomach, all the way down to like 4.5, 5, which is still acidic. Now, that acidic environment is really important because the acidic environment is what controls the dysfunctional bacteria from overgrowing. It also controls the mold and fungus from overgrowing because they don't like the acidic environment. Now, how is the acidic environment maintained? Well, there are microbes in there that produce lactic acid, right? So now you've got this lactic acid, a healthy gut, lots of lactic acid bacteria, keeping the pH low, meaning more acidic. Now, everything gets knocked down, including the lactic acid bacteria. They're no longer producing lactic acid for that few hours. So then the pH goes up. Now it becomes a little bit more neutral or basic, which means in that environment, the dysfunctional microbes grow back faster, right? And with every dose, boom, everything gets knocked down again. The dysfunctional microbes grow back even faster. So we are altering what the ecosystem looks like, thereby selecting for the more dysfunctional organisms to grow back faster.
So you're just creating an environment where they thrive, essentially.
Where they thrive.
More than the good.
Exactly.
What about medications like, something that people get put on a lot is things for antacid, like, okay, I've got acid reflux. And how does that affect the gut? Because I imagine if you're trying to reduce the acid in the body, does it have the same effect as antibiotics? Or?
It can have a longer term, even more deleterious effect. Right. So there's this condition. So the antacids that people use or reflux medication, they're called PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, right? That's a category. There are now really good data showing that PPIs dramatically increase your risk of cardiovascular disease.
No way.
For example, right?
Why?
Because of this amazing amount of chronic low-grade inflammation that they cause, right? And I'll tie that back to leaky gut, which is where everything starts to fall apart, is when your gut becomes leaky. The other issue with PPI, so your stomach and your stomach acid is considered a gastric barrier. That's a very important component of your entire immune system and protective system, right? Because we're constantly exposed to microbes that could potentially be harmful, whether it's from food or the environment or even our own mouths, right? We're swallowing roughly 50 billion or so bacteria every single day, right? From our mouths. And our mouths tend to be very contaminated. People have heard the human mouth is dirtier than a dog's mouth and all that, right? So we've got a high density of microbes in our mouth, and many of those microbes can be problematic if they're allowed to live in our GI tract. But the thing that prevents them normally from living in the GI tract is the stomach acid. Because you're swallowing it, they're getting killed in the stomach acid, so they end up in the intestines, but they're dead. Right. And then you just poop them out, right? Several hours later. If you compromise stomach acid by using these proton pump inhibitors or antacids and all that, you're allowing these oral bacteria to survive and colonize in the small intestine, completely changing what that environment looks like. The most common thing that leads to is something I'm sure you've heard is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or bloating. So this is where all of this IBS like bloating, cramping, loose stool, indigestion feelings come from. It comes from a change in the microbial environment in the small intestine. And one of the drivers of that is this reduction in stomach acid and swallowing of all of these oral bacteria. The other thing that reduces stomach acid is stress, right? So going back to just making small changes to how your digestive system is supposed to function can create a whole deleterious cascade.
And this is just, I'm asking for a personal reason, for a family member. If someone is being told that they should go on, anti-acids or are there things that in their diet or in their lifestyle that people can do to try and help that without having to go on this medication?
Yeah, if they're being recommended to go on it because of reflux, for example, right? The big misnomer is that reflux is a issue of having too much stomach acid. It's actually the opposite. Reflux is an issue that occurs because you have too little stomach acid. Right. And you're getting fermentation and gas production in the stomach, which is not supposed to happen. So the acid actually prevents that. So there are some really amazing natural ingredients that can help for people with reflux issues. A couple of things. So one is bitters. Digestive bitters are incredibly powerful for allowing the gastric system to empty, for releasing adequate hydrochloric acid, which is the stomach acid that we have, and also controlling the movement of the food so that it doesn't sit for too long in the stomach and ferment. Okay. Right? So digestive bitters are critically important. In fact, they bind these things called bitter receptors that we have all throughout our stomach and our intestines. And when they bind the bitter receptors, they send signals that tells the brain to, hey, release more stomach acid or release more pancreatic enzymes, which help us digest our food or move the food along so that it can get digested and broken down properly. Okay. Right? So if you're dealing with reflux and all that, I would look at digestive bitters. Yeah, I've been taking the Just Thrive ones. Oh, perfect. They might be my favorite supplement that Just Thrive does, because I've studied Ayurveda and it talks about bitters as such an important category in the food that you eat. And it's probably something that people avoid the most because who's eating a whole lot of like kale and dandelion root, and they're just not really having as much bitter foods as you would need in your gut. Yeah. And so taking the digestive bitters has been such a game changer to even have my gut feels on a daily basis of just eating food. Yeah. So digestive bitters. And it's going back to basics, right? Yeah. So when we were thinking about the digestive bitters, and that became a real passion area for me, because I kept looking at like, what are we not like activating in our digestive system, right? So why do we have so much bloating and indigestion and all that? Like, why is that so prevalent nowadays? And there's a few different reasons for it. But then when you look at basic digestive functions, remember I mentioned that we don't have enough genetics to do all of the things we need to do as humans. We take resources from microbes and plants and all of that, right? So one of the things that we've outsourced to the plant world was to provide a stimulus in our digestive tract to tell our brain that food is coming through, where the food is, what kind of food it is, release the stomach acid, release the digestive secretions, release the enzymes so that we can properly digest and utilize our food, right? The signals for that come from binding bitter receptors. So, and the way we evolved is that if you think about our ancestors, they were gatherers, they were foragers, they hunted some and so on, but they ate a lot of different things, right? They ate seeds and nuts and roots and tubers and, flowers and things like that. So they got all these bitter compounds into their diet. So over the course of human evolution, we evolved to expect bitters to come in as an indication that food is within the system, right? So you've got these switches in your digestive tract that have to be turned on when food is in there.
Right.
And in fact, these switches account for upwards of 50% of the digestive signaling to tell the body that there's food in there. You got to utilize the food and break it down, right? The bitters account for 50%. So then about 50, 60 years ago, we farmed all of the bitters out of our products, right? Because people don't like the taste.
Yes.
Right? We've kind of moved more towards savory and sweet and so on. So we have no bitters in our diet.
No.
And as a result of that, we are not turning on upwards of half of the digestive switches when we eat food. Right? So we've got this complex, beautiful digestive system, and half of the signaling is shut down.
That's so interesting. And I love what you said, when you were talking about the body as a rainforest. In Ayurveda, it talks about this so much. And since I locked into that in my body of how nature literally has everything that we need to sustain and optimize our health, we just need to know what from nature we need to be taking. And so I love how you touched on that, because it's true, even growing up, obviously in an Indian house, there was a lot of bitter foods. Like my parents eat Karala, like what are they called in English? Like in Kerala, but what's another word for it? Is it bitter gourd?
Bitter gourd, yeah.
Bitter gourd, yeah. Yeah, they have that like a few times a week at least. And there's like methi or fenugreek seeds that are used in our, it's such a natural way of us eating, is having bitter spices or bitter foods. Yeah. But when I ended up, when you come to America or the UK, those flavors, that palate is just not there. It's not something that people are used to having. Yep. And so I think having, something like a supplement, if you're not used to having bitter foods every single day, then I think it's really needed, just like we take, vitamin C or whatever else it is that we're taking in our supplements. I think it's a really necessary part of it.
Yeah. And not turning on those switches, those digestive switches, right? So remember I said about 50% of the digestive signaling comes from activating these bitter receptors. And so we're not clicking on those switches as the food is moving through.
The digestion's just lazy.
It's lazy. It's not happening, right? It's not, we're literally in a maldigestive state, meaning we're failing to digest the food appropriately. Then what happens is you get this adverse response where there's too much fermentation in the wrong place. Your body doesn't know how to deal with the nutrients coming in. You can't release enough bile to deal with the fatty acids. So then that creates runniness and gurgling in the tummy. The fermentation creates a lot of bloating. Yeah. Everything starts to fall apart. And the problem with that is that not only is it inconvenient to have digestive issues and it disrupts your quality of life, but it's also the beginning of foundational disruption to how the rest of your system works. Yes. Right? Because we talked about how the gut is where everything starts. Yeah. And so digestive issues become the precursor to much more complicated and serious issues.
Before I ask my next question, I wanted to go back to the acid question, because you mentioned bitters. Was there anything else that you think people should add into their diet before?
Yeah. So, and this might be counterintuitive, and maybe talk to a doctor or nutritionist or somebody you can work with. But you may actually want to add more acid to your diet. Okay. So there's supplements like betaine HCl, which is a hydrochloric acid that you can take as a supplement, right? Because remember, reflux is actually an issue of not enough acid. Right. You could take betaine HCl, you use some bitters, and you use a good probiotic that helps you break down the food and move things along. That should typically take care of the issue. Now, a couple other simple things you can do as well. You want to activate the cephalic response. Okay. Cephalic response is the pre-digestive signaling that occurs from smelling food, seeing food, right? Your mouth waters, literally, right? But it also is the first signal to your body that, hey, food is coming through, so let's prep the system to deal with it, right? So you start releasing a little bit of hydrochloric acid. You start releasing some digestive enzymes in your mouth. So salivary amylase, it's called, right? What we tend to do is we eat too fast on the go, right? We don't appreciate the food and so on. So, we all remember growing up with family, if it's a big meal, like a festival or something, like a Diwali or something, right? You've got this beautiful meal set up and you can smell it cooking all day long and you can't wait to sit down and eat it. And you see it all laid out there. It's beautiful. And all of that is triggering the cephalic response. So we want to get a little bit what I call it's food hygiene. It's not cleanliness. It's about how do you approach eating, right? Number one, slow it down. Number two, sit for a moment. And this might sound a little hokey, but it really, really works.
Does.
Sit for a moment and appreciate the food. Like appreciate the texture, the color, the smell, right? You don't have to be too cuckoo about it, but just for a moment, appreciate it, because your brain is then telling your digestive system, okay, let's get ready. We're going to start digesting soon, right? Then chew your food. Right? Like chew it thoroughly, but chew it slowly. Because if you don't chew it slowly, you suck in a lot of air when you're chewing, and your stomach gets full of air, and that air has to escape somehow, and it pushes things up like acid.
Okay.
Right? So just that little bit of meal hygiene helps. And then you add in the bitters, you add in some digestive enzymes if you need to, and a probiotic, and your system should work exactly the way it's designed.
I love that. Even the moment just before you eat of just taking a beat, it also can just reduce the small amount of stress that might be going on in your body. Or like if you're in anxiety from like working and then you suddenly take a break to eat, instead of receiving that food with anxiety where your gut is still like that and it's feeling that anxiousness, you get to take a moment to just relax your gut and your digestive system. And it makes such a difference. My granddad used to make like my mom and her two brothers chew their food 32 times, like get them into the practice of chewing their food 32 times. And the meals would take such a long time. But I remember my mom saying like my granddad would constantly, if they would chew too fast or eat their meal too fast, he would say, no, chew your food 32 times before you swallow it. Even if it's something that's soft and even if it's really well cooked, you have to keep chewing it.
You have to. And if you think about the evolutionary significance of that, right? So here's one way to think about it. For the most part, we know what we're eating now. There's little danger in terms of like poisoning from what we ate. But back in the day, when people are like foraging and all that, you don't know what you're picking. Is that going to kill you? Is it healthy for you or what, right? Yeah. And so we have some defensive mechanisms in our system. That's actually part of why you have bitter receptors in your mouth as well. Oh. You know, and it's a misnomer that all the bitter receptors are in your mouth, but they're not. There's some in there which are important. The rest are in the digestive tract. Okay. But the reason for the bitter receptors in the mouth is because toxins or poisons tend to be really astringent and very bitter. So you have this reflux response where you put it in, you chew it, and if it's so bitter, it triggers this response where you spit it out. Right. Now, let's say you ate something and it's not triggering that response, so you're not spitting it out, but you need your immune system to sample the food that's coming in. Because your immune system will help decide, is this something that I need to attack, neutralize, or just tolerate, right? That chewing, you've got a lot of immune tissue in your mouth. Your saliva is full of antibodies. And so that is part of coating the food with your own antibodies, your own immune factors to introduce the food you're eating to your immune system.
Wow.
Right? So your immune system has time to really examine what you're putting in because it's your immune system's job to defend you for it, right? Yeah. So if your immune system is confused and doesn't have enough time to develop what we call oral tolerance, you start eating things, it attacks it.
Yeah.
How does that feel? Bloating, cramping, indigestion, and so on.
It reminds me of when I was in India 2 years ago, and I was on this pilgrimage thing. So we were eating, like there was bulk food being made for thousands and thousands of people. I ate this cassava curry, and I was one of the first people to take it. And suddenly my whole mouth started going numb. I started feeling so sick. They hadn't taken out there's like poisonous strands or something that you have to take out when you cook cassava. I was one of the first people to eat it. Suddenly, I felt so unwell. I go to the side, I'm throwing up, and I'd be like, tell everyone not to eat. And it was one of those exact experiences where my mouth started feeling it. Luckily, I was eating slowly. I had a couple of bites and I was like, something's going wrong. But it was exactly what you're describing. The whole system happened. And luckily, wasn't scoffing it down for me to have had too much of it. But
yeah, imagine if you had the practice of just barely chewing and eating too fast.
Exactly.
You consumed enough of it to probably make you sick early on, right? So we want to go back to the basics. You know, like you said, nature has given us all the tools that we need to be functional and healthy. We just can't forget them and kind of go back to the basics, which is where we developed the probiotics too. The probiotics are really going back to foundations of how we interact with microbes.
You mentioned your probiotics. I was going to ask you a question later on about it, but let's hit it now because I know that there are so many probiotic supplements supplements out there, people get really confused. Now, I'm just going to read what I know that your probiotics have spore-based probiotics. Can you share what that is and why spore-based probiotics are better than any other type?
Yeah, and you have to get the right spores too. So let me tell you a little bit about how we came about it, right? It's really going back to this idea that anytime we try to outsmart or circumvent nature, we tend to stumble and fall.
Right.
But if we're just smart enough to know what nature's already provided us and then embrace it and study it and understand it, then we can typically make significant progress, right? Because everything is here for us already.
Yeah.
So when we started thinking about probiotics, we said, okay, you see all these products on the shelf and it's like 50 billion, 60 billion CFUs, right? Crazy amounts of doses, 15 strains, 25 strains, and so on. And I remember thinking to myself about 15 years ago, and I wasn't using probiotics at all as a microbiologist. It didn't quite make sense to me. And I was like, okay, let me dig into this a little bit and see what's like the reasoning behind all this design.
Yeah.
And so I started looking into it and I go, okay, nowhere in nature do we encounter these types of strains at these doses in this way, right? So it's a very unnatural thing to be taking 50 billion, 60 billion of these 18 strains, right? It doesn't happen in nature. And so I said, okay, but clearly we have a very deep, intimate relationship with microbes. So what is the natural probiotic out there? Like, how do we naturally interact with microbes?
Yep.
So our first encounter with microbes is actually in utero. When you're in mom's womb, there are immune cells in her body called dendritic cells that can actually reach across her gut lining, pull her bacteria from her gut, and take it to the baby in the womb.
That's amazing.
It's crazy.
It is really, it's incredible.
But here's where it gets even more crazy. Why is it taking it there, right? There are microbes in your gut that have certain carbohydrates on their outer cell membrane. Those are called exopolysaccharides, right? That's a technical term for them. As it turns out, the placenta has receptor sites for these bacterial exopolysaccharides. The baby's brain has receptor sites for these exopolysaccharides. So when the mom's immune cells take the exopolysaccharide-laden bacteria to the baby, it binds these receptors and it triggers parts of the brain development.
Wow.
So we've outsourced probably one of the most important aspects of developing a human in the womb, which is developing its brain. We've outsourced part of that signaling to bacterial components, right? It goes back to what I was saying before. We don't have enough genes to do everything we do.
Right.
So nature has found a way to cooperate with microorganisms to say, hey, microbes, we need the stimulus, the signal. So we're going to work together. I'm not going to attack you. We're going to live symbiotically, but your carbohydrate that you're making, we're going to use that as a trigger to develop my baby's brain in utero, right? So it's foundationally, it's that important from the beginning. Okay. So we said, okay, in utero, you interact with all these microbes. Hopefully you're a vaginal birth, which means you got amazing inoculum from mom's vaginal bacteria. And then most women, when they're pushing out, they're going to defecate too. So you're going to get in contact with mom's fecal bacteria. That becomes the initial inoculum the baby's exposed to, right? Which is really, really important. We know now if the baby is C-section, that it's going to almost double the risk of allergies, asthma, food sensitivities, and all that, right? It almost doubles the risk of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so on. Just from being born through C-section, not through the vaginal canal, because not getting that initial inoculum. Now, after birth, mom hopefully has the opportunity to nurse the baby. Breast milk has upwards of 600 different types of microbes in it.
Incredible.
Right? Massive amounts of probiotic bacteria. And about 18% or so of the solids in breast milk are prebiotics, oligosaccharides that the baby can't digest, but it's there purely to feed the bacteria.
Right.
So the bacteria can establish itself, right? So that's the initial relationship and intimate connection we have with microbes. Then after you're born and after the first couple of years and all the skin-to-skin contact and the kissing and all that, right? So that's all really important to develop the microbial environment. The rest of your life, you're engaging with microbes in the environment.
Okay.
Right? Our ancestors, our relatives also still today, they live within the dirt. They don't live in sterile environments, right? They eat foods that have dirt on it. They pick things and they brush off the dirt and they eat things with microbes on it. So we have this intimate relationship with microbes in the environment.
Right.
So when we started looking at probiotics, we said, okay, what kind of microbes within the environment could potentially act as a probiotic, right? Which means that they have to be able to get through the system alive and function in the intestines in some way that's beneficial to the host.
Right.
So we honed in on these microbes that live ubiquitously in natural environments. They're called Bacillus endospores.
Right.
But what's unique about them is they can live in the outside world under UV radiation with oxygen and all that. But they can also live in the gut, which is a very different environment. There's no light, it's dark in there, and there's no oxygen in the gut, right? So they can live in both of those unique environments, and they can survive through the gastric system. Remember, I mentioned the gastric barrier is there to kill most microbes going in. But these microbes have a natural capability of surviving through the gastric system and getting to the intestines alive. So our first clue was, okay, the fact that nature gave him this unique capability of living in the outside environment and living in the gut, which are very different environments, and surviving through this gauntlet that we have to kill microbes, maybe they're designed to do something effective in the gut. So that's where we honed in on these Bacillus endospores, and we found a bunch of research done by brilliant researchers at universities. Actually, Royal Holloway University of London was one of the leading areas of this.
Amazing.
They found that these Bacillus endospores are normal commensals in the gut. We are supposed to pick them up from the environment. They go in, they do a lot of things to fix the gut, and we'll talk about what they do. And then they stay for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then we defecate them out, right? So they use the environment as a vector to get from host to host.
Wow.
So the environment is a temporary place for them. The gut is their actual home. And here's a fascinating thing. When we look at the cellular building blocks of life on Earth. So on meteorites and all that, scientists have identified nucleic acids that make up our DNA. They've identified proteins. They've identified cellular machinery that come from meteorites from outer space, right? So then the question is like, okay, what seeded the cellular components of life on Earth? So then they started looking at what kind of bacteria on Earth could survive interstellar travel on a meteorite, for example, right? And potentially seed the cellular building blocks of life. So these same Bacillus endospores they studied could survive in the vacuum of space for 7 years. And can come in on a meteorite and seed the cellular machinery of life on Earth. It's the theory is called panspermia, and there's a lot of great research around it. So then they started looking at really ancient versions of these bacteria. So actually in a cave in Southern California, they were looking and they were going deeper into the deep recesses of the caves that haven't been touched by man. They found in these salt crystals that have been around for millions of years, they were able to dissolve the salt crystals. They found bacteria in there that were 250 million years old. Right? And they were still alive. They could still plate them and grow them in an incubator. And these were spore-based bacteria that were there well before humans were, right? So they are arguably one of the original foundations of life on Earth. They play a critical role in our system. Nature has had it here from the dawn of man. We just have to be smart enough to identify and know that they're there and figure out how to use them.
I love how you said that they come, they do their job and they leave. They're like, we're not permanent employees, we're contractors. We come, we make you better, and then we leave. Okay, but how does someone know? Look, people take supplements all the time. How do they know these are actually working? Because sometimes you can keep taking things because you know they're good for you. Should you be feeling a difference, and what difference should you be feeling from taking probiotics?
Yeah, so if you have a primary digestive issue, so let's say you have like IBS-like symptoms, right? Your bowels are irritated, you don't deal well with food. An effective probiotic within the first 30 days or so should make you feel something significantly improving within your digestive system. Right? If you get a lot of bloating, cramping when you eat food, that should start to alleviate. It may not fix it in that time, but you should start to feel a relief from those symptoms. Now, what else do you start to feel? Well, so then you should sleep better, right? Generally, your gut and your brain are connected. It's called the gut-brain axis that people talk about. And dysfunction in the gut drives sleep deprivation and sleep issues, right? So you should rest better. If you use devices like the Oura Ring and so on, you should be able to see your sleep score improving without trying significantly. Your afternoon energy, you should feel better, right? You shouldn't get that drop and slump in the afternoon. You should be more energetic. You'll actually start to see things like issues on your skin. So So there's something called the gut-skin axis. Of course, what happens in the gut impacts the skin quite a bit. So if you've got inflammatory issues on the skin, and your skin is sensitive and all that, those things tend to improve. Just cognitive function alone, right? So brain fog is very closely tied to the gut.
Wow.
And so when your gut is improving, you'll just have more clarity. Your memory will be better. Like you'll start to feel better functioning overall. Yeah, a better version of yourself is a great way to put it. And we can connect all of these through mechanisms, through biochemistry, and I could talk about that stuff all day long, right? But really what we're getting at is that the gut is a central command center of how the rest of your system works. If you're improving your gut with a probiotic, if it's something that actually does something beneficial, you will feel it in all different parts of your body.
You know what's so interesting? One of my family members recently went to see a holistic doctor, and she was saying how their gut is just really messed up. They take on some medications and things are just not great right now. But the first thing that she said, she's also like a bit of a healer, and she said your mood and just your vibrance seems lower. And the first thing that they said back was, I've been feeling really low mood. Like I feel more sad, and I haven't been feeling happy in life as much. So on a scale of like 1 to 10, I've been feeling a 4, and I don't usually feel like a 4.
Yeah.
And so it reminded me of how insane it is that our gut literally can affect our mood, our sadness, our emotions. Could you talk a little bit more about why there's a connection there?
Yeah, and that's a really, really important connection, because we are in a bit of an epidemic of depression, anxiety, and all that, right? You just look at the volatility of the world around us. People are not in a good place mentally, generally. And just to throw a stat out there, right? So if you look at people with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, if you have IBS, somewhere around 60% of people with IBS have diagnosed mood disorders, right? Anxiety and depression. If you look at the same age group of people who don't have IBS, it's less than 19%. So just having IBS means you're 3 or 4 times more likely to have anxiety and depression, right? They go hand in hand because it's a gut-brain issue. So what's actually happening? Well, we have something called the fight-or-flight response, right? The fight-or-flight response is a really important response to keep us alive. It used to be this primitive thing that only kicks on in situations that could be endangering your life. We're walking down the grasslands, we hear a rustling in the grass, right? And it could be a predator, and maybe we have some memory or some learning about that sound and that smell and so on. And so your body goes into this fight or flight. So to get you out of the situation. So here's what's actually happening in the fight or flight, right? So your hypothalamus picks up the visual and auditory clues, right? It senses that it's something that's potentially harmful. So then you have the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, HPA axis, right? So the hypothalamus then activates the pituitary, tells the pituitary, hey, we got to move. Release some cortisol. Cortisol being the stress hormone. So the pituitary goes, okay, let's release some cortisol. The adrenals go, we're coming in. We're going to release adrenaline, right? Epinephrine, norepinephrine. So now this chemistry is working to get you ready to fight or flee. So how is it doing that? It wants to prioritize blood getting to your brain so that you'll be visually and auditorily and cognitively accurate and really, on point. And then it wants to get blood to your heart so that your heart can carry you in the way you need to. And then blood to your muscles, right? So you can fight or flee. It's deprioritizing digestion. Forget the food that you just ate. We're not digesting it right now. Forget your immune system. We're not doing that. Forget all the repair that we need to do. We're not doing that. You have to survive, right? So it's an absolute survival instinct. So now cortisol's kicking up, adrenaline's kicking up, and so on. Your body is going into this inflammatory fight or flight response because the way it gets inflammation to your brain, the way it gets blood to your brain and your heart is by activating inflammation. Right? Inflammation is circulation, right? So if you like rub your skin really hard and gets red, it's irritated, but that redness is circulation coming to there with inflammatory markers. So now you're inflamed. Your brain is inflamed. Your heart is inflamed. Your muscles are inflamed. They're perfused with blood just to get you to be able to fight or flee. You also can't repair anything. You can't digest anything, and nor can you rest, right? But it doesn't matter because you have to fight or flee. So now let's say you run away from whatever that sound is. You make your way up a tree and you get up in the tree and you go, Okay, it was a bunny rabbit, right? So there's nothing dangerous there. Now your system has to come off that big spike of cortisol and epinephrine, norepinephrine. You have to go back to that parasympathetic rest, digest, relax phase, right? So how does that happen? As it turns out, your gut microbiome plays a very important role in that. It's a checkpoint to help you turn off the fight or flight and go back to the rest and digest, right? So here's what happens if you don't have the right microbes or a high diversity in the gut microbiome. The cortisol, as it's going up, is making everything inflamed and all that. But some of the cortisol is also dumping in the gut. Some microbes metabolize the cortisol, sends part of those metabolic byproducts to your kidneys. Your kidneys use that as a signal to put in more potassium and sodium into your circulation. So more water follows into your circulation. What that does is increases your blood pressure, right? And the reason you want to increase your blood pressure in that situation is you want more perfusion. Right. You want the blood to rush to your muscles and all that. This is why chronic stress creates hypertension. Because of that process, right? So we all know that chronic stress increases blood pressure, but it's for that reason. So all that is happening. You're trying to fight or flee. Now your cortisol, as you relax and you realize the danger is not there anymore, your cortisol is supposed to be bound up by these glucocorticoid receptors that you have throughout your body. But if your gut is dysfunctional, what happens instead is the cortisol causes massive amounts of transient leakiness in the gut. And you get these inflammatory cytokines that increase, like IL-1, interleukin-1. When those increase, what they do is they re-trigger the HPA axis, as if you're encountering another danger signal, right?
Yeah.
And then the whole cycle starts up again. And by the time you try to come back down, it re-triggers it again and again and again.
Okay.
And it keeps people in a constant state of fight or flight without being able to go to the rest, digest, and repair. What does that feel like? It feels like you have an elevated basal level of anxiety. All the stress stimuli amplifies you even more because you can't deal with it with a sound mind, right? And a balanced mind. You also cannot digest, so you're bloating, you're indigestion, you can't deal with food very well. You can't rest, so you don't sleep well, so you can't recover well. Your immune system is tanking in that situation, so you get sick all the time. That is the standard Westerner, right? Because we are constantly in fight or flight and we can't come down from it. And your gut is a checkpoint to turn all that off, which is crazy.
Do a lot of our, like the serotonin and all our happy hormones, is there a place where it's created in our gut, or is that not true? Oh, that's true.
The vast majority of serotonin is created in your gut.
Okay.
But even and the serotonin in your gut is used mostly in your gut and circulation for lots of things. It's anti-inflammatory, it moves the bowels and all that.
Right.
Dopamine is also created largely in your gut. But what's even more important than the serotonin itself that's created in the gut is the precursor to serotonin called tryptophan.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
So tryptophan is what serotonin and melatonin are made from.
Oh.
Right? And the majority of your tryptophan is made in the gut by microbes.
Okay.
So then your central nervous system takes that tryptophan and is trying to convert it to serotonin and melatonin in your brain and central nervous system, which is your happy hormone, your relaxing hormone, and your ability to sleep.
Yeah.
Right? But here's the thing. So remember I said the gut-brain connection. If you're in this fight or flight sympathetic state and you don't have a healthy gut to turn that off and bring you back to parasympathetic state, when that tryptophan goes into your central nervous system, it's not being converted to serotonin and melatonin. It's being converted to something called quinolinic acid, which is neurotoxic.
Oh, no.
Right? So now this compound that's supposed to make your happy and sleep hormone is actually creating a neurotoxic compound. All because your gut is not in the right position. It's not shutting off that fight or flight switch. You are inflamed, and as a result of that, you're taking something that should be calming, restful, reparative into something that's more neurotoxic, right? And you're constantly in a high frequency brainwave.
Yeah.
Right? And when you meet the world and stressors in a high frequency brainwave, it amplifies everything, right? What you need to do is be able to switch to a low frequency brainwave, like a theta wave, to meet a stressor, because then you can manage the stressor better.
Wow.
And one of the really important practices that does that is meditation, right? That's one of the really key benefits of meditation, is that it allows you to be focused on something, working diligently in a high frequency brainwave. But let's say there's a stress signal here, you can turn to it and meet that in a low frequency brainwave, right? The gut also does that. Right? When you have the right microbes in the gut, when your gut is diverse and not leaky, microbes in the gut can change your brainwave function for you, right? Again, nature is there doing these things for you. We just have to be smart enough to know how to use it.
Okay, so I just want to go back a little bit to probiotics because there's prebiotics and there's probiotics.
Yeah.
Do people need to be taking both?
Yes, they really should be.
Okay.
And what is the difference between the two, right? So probiotics have to be live microorganisms that when you take them, have to survive through the gastric system, get into the intestines alive, and then they have a beneficial effect on the host. So they're bacteria. Prebiotics are very specific types of carbohydrates that feed certain classes of bacteria. Now, within your gut, there are these microbes that are considered keystone species, right? So microbiologists around the world that study the microbiome have created this designation of keystone species. So then what are these keystone species? Why are they called that, right? So if you remember most medieval architecture where you have arches, and these arches are just amazing innovations because arches can hold up so much weight above them, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at all the old medieval bridges, they're all arch designs. The cathedrals are all arches. But the key component of an arch that makes it functional is the keystone that's at the very top of that arch, right?
Okay.
It's a stone that's slanted on both sides that then dissipates the load throughout the arch in a very uniform way. If you pull that keystone out, the entire cathedral falls apart, right? So a keystone species in your gut is a species that holds up the rest of the ecosystem. It's that important for your system. These keystone species, we've identified 8, 9, 10-ish. Some of them are arguable whether they're keystone or not, but there's certainly some in there. They're all in the large bowel. They're all anaerobic, meaning oxygen is toxic to them. They all require fiber, polyphenols, plant-based materials, and they're all very susceptible to things like antibiotics and pesticides and herbicides and all that. And when you start killing off your keystone species and reducing their numbers, the rest of the ecosystem starts to fall apart.
Right.
It's a house of cards that starts to crumble, right? And so one of the best things you can do for your gut, one of the most powerful things, is bring back the keystone species to the relevant amounts that they need to be in your system. The spore-based probiotics do that. They help regrow the keystone species. I actually published a paper with a couple of researchers about 4 years ago showing that just 3 weeks of like the Just Thrive probiotic can increase the growth of the keystone species by 40, 50%. Right? Very significantly. Then when you pair it with a prebiotic, like an oligosaccharide they're called, then you almost triple that effect.
Okay.
Right? So that combination of prebiotic and probiotic becomes really important to support those keystone species.
And so is that a great protocol for someone to go onto if they are taking antibiotics? Like should they get onto pre and probiotics as soon as they get onto antibiotics?
Yes. So, actually you asked that very important question. So to go back to that, let's say you have to take a course of antibiotics. And of course, there's many situations where it'll save your life. So do it if your doctor is telling you to do it. But here's what you want to do. All right. So most antibiotics are going to be somewhere between 7 to 10 days or 21 days, depending on the issues, right? You want to be very diligent about repairing the gut for at least 3 times as long as the course of antibiotics work.
Okay.
So that's where you start, baseline, right? So for example, if your doctor says it's a 7-day course of antibiotics, you want to go, I want to be hyper vigilant about fixing my gut for at least 21 days.
Right. Okay.
That's an easy place to start. So then what do you do with that hypervigilance? Number one, you take a probiotic that has been clinically shown to be able to support the microbes in your gut, the beneficial microbes, even in the presence of antibiotics.
Right.
So the spores do that because they have that stability and that resilience. We actually published a study showing that when you take a course of antibiotics, it diminishes the keystone bacteria and the diversity really low and makes the gut leaky. But if you use the spores with it, it actually starts to negate all of those negative effects, right? But then try to separate the spores by a couple of hours from the antibiotic.
Okay.
So the antibiotic is a morning, evening kind of dose, then take the spores right in the between in the afternoon, right? With it, take prebiotics as well, and then try to increase your fiber dosage by around 10 to 15 grams per day.
Okay.
Simple stuff like psyllium husk or something simple like that, right? Just increase your fiber dosage. And that in itself, and doing that diligently for 21 days, if it's a 7-day course, will really negate a lot of the damage.
Amazing.
Right? Simple things that you can do. And then for the rest of the time, just go back to your normal maintenance of the probiotics, prebiotics, and so on. I would even elevate it because if I have to take a course of antibiotics, I double everything I do. I double the dose of the probiotic, I double the dose of the prebiotic, and I double my fiber intake.
Simple. Okay,
right?
great.
Simple. And it just protects your system.
You mentioned, we mentioned skin being one of the things that the gut influences. And I think skin issues is something that's also increased a lot recently. Eczema, acne, whatever it is, there's people who are really suffering from a lot of skin issues, especially what I'm noticing is eczema, whether it's in adulthood or as a child. Are there certain foods that people should be avoiding when it comes to their skin health linked with their gut, or is it just as simple they really need to fix what's happening in their gut for them to improve their skin?
Yeah, so that's a really, really important question. So eczema is a bit of an epidemic right now, but it drives another problem that's also an epidemic. So eczema is directly linked to asthma, food sensitivities, allergies, and food intolerances in general.
Yeah, people tend to have all three of them.
All three of them.
Yeah,
right?
because I remember when I was growing up, my sister had eczema, asthma, and we ended up having issues with food stuff.
Allergies.
Yeah.
Totally. And here's why. There's a process. It's called the atopic march. Okay. So here's what's happening there. Eczema is a disruption of your skin barrier. You've got an overgrowth of a type of bacteria called Staph aureus. Okay. It starts to break down the top layer of your skin. The top layer of your skin is called the stratum corneum. You also will have an unhealthy inside, so you're not rebuilding the skin effectively from the inside.
Right.
And if your gut is unhealthy on top of that, your immune system is not functioning properly. So anything that's happening on the surface of your skin, your immune system continuously attacks.
Yep.
So you're disrupting the barrier of the skin. Okay. So what happens in that case is food antigens, environmental antigens, actually penetrate through your skin into circulation, and your immune system encounters it in your skin. Now, when your immune system encounters any antigen in your skin and not through your gut, it thinks that something's invading your system because the skin is a barrier, right? If something penetrates through the barrier, your immune system's literally going, holy crap, this is bad. We got to attack this.
Yeah.
So it attacks whatever's coming in with a very strong inflammatory response. If it happens to be a peanut antigen or ragweed or pollen that's coming in, it's going to remember to attack that every time it sees it anywhere in the body.
Wow.
So when you eat it, it's going to attack it. When you breathe it in, it's going to attack it. You develop sensitivities. You develop food allergies, asthma, eczema, and so on, right? So it's that's called an atopic march. So kids with eczema or dermatitis have 8 times higher risk of developing allergies, asthma, and food sensitivities as a result of that. Right? So then the question, what should you do from a gut perspective? Because there is a gut-skin axis.
Yeah.
And it's really important because the skin is built from the inside out, right?
Yeah.
The topmost layer of skin is kind of dead skin cells.
Yeah.
But all of the structural elements are underneath. Number one, from a dietary perspective, try to reduce or avoid dairy. Try to reduce and avoid gluten.
Yes.
Right? Those two things have been shown in upwards of 50 clinical trials to be inflammatory for certain types of people for the skin. Right? So if your skin is already inflammatory, you have acne, you have eczema, you have dermatitis, you want to avoid those or reduce them significantly until you can tolerate them again. And you will be able to tolerate them again if you follow a certain progress. So that's one thing. Number two, you really want to get your prebiotics, your probiotics, and your fiber in. And the reason for that is when you have the right bacteria in your gut, like the spores, for example, and then you take a prebiotic with it, the prebiotics are being converted to something called short-chain fatty acids. And one of the short-chain fatty acids is called acetate. Acetate is really important for reducing inflammation in the skin and inducing repair on the skin, right? Also, when you eat food, then you also get these things called phytonutrients. These are nutrients that come in from plants. One of them is phytoceramides that are found in like rice bran and things like that. These are fatty acids that are then converted by the liver and then sent to the skin to repair the skin from the inside out.
Okay.
Right? One of the barriers that you have on your skin is called a ceramide layer. It acts as a sticky mortar that sticks all your skin cells together and creates an impenetrable layer. Those ceramides, though, come from the gut. So you need to have a healthy gut and a healthy liver as a result of that to form these ceramides and feed the skin. And you need the acetate also to do that. In fact, I organized and ran one of the largest probiotic acne studies ever.
No way.
And it was with the same strains that are in the Just Thrive probiotic. Yeah. And what we saw was in a non-cystic acne individual, right? In a 3-month period, we were able to reduce acne lesions by 75%.
And the only thing they changed was
just a probiotic.
No
just taking the
way.
probiotic, right? And actually got a US patent for the technology. And the reason for that is we were able to figure out that when you take the right probiotic, like the spores, it increases this acetate production in the gut. That acetate plays a significant role in reducing inflammation in the skin and modulating the immune response in the skin, thereby allowing the skin to heal. In the case of acne, allowing the lesions to go away. In the case of other inflammatory issues, allowing those to repair, right?
Beautiful.
So simple. And the reason I became passionate about that is because I was saying doctors are using 3 to 6 months of antibiotics to cure pimples, right? It's so crazy to think that we're going to do these atom bombs to your system that can have long-term deleterious effect for a cosmetic reason.
Yes.
There's got to be a better way to do this.
Definitely.
That's when we started looking at the impact of the gut-skin axis and the role of the probiotics.
It's so great that you have studies that back this up, because like there's so much you could talk about, but the fact that people get to see science, it really will help people to think, okay, maybe I don't need to do that for my skin. Maybe I can try all these other routes before I turn to something like that.
Yep.
You spoke about fiber. We've spoken about it quite a lot. During this conversation, I read a stat that said only 5% of Americans actually have the right amount of fiber that they're supposed to.
Yes.
Tell me why fiber is so important and why are people not having enough of it and what should they be eating?
Yeah. And I like to frame it this way with fiber because I have this goal of making fiber sexy.
Okay. Right? I love it. Let's do it.
Because fiber is so boring and it's like people are like, fiber, it's like eating a bark of a tree.
Yeah.
But let me frame it in a different way. Okay. Imagine, Radhi, I came to you and I said, I've discovered a compound. And get this. If you take enough of this compound, it will reduce your risk of dying from anything by 45 to 50%.
I'll take it.
Right? Yeah. Like cutting it in half, right? Your risk of dying from anything. You would go, holy crap, how can I get this? And by the way, that is a massive claim. So extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And you might say, what is your proof that this thing does that? And I'll go, well, there's about 180 published studies. Wow. There are about 153 million person years in clinical trials that have shown this. Wow. There are studies, the meta-analysis studies with over 1 million subjects that have proven this. And you go, okay, fine. There's enough research. I believe you, right? This thing can reduce my risk of dying from anything by 45%. Wow. What is this miracle thing? Where did you get it? Is it from outer space, right? Yeah. And I would say that thing is fiber.
That's crazy.
It's just plain old fiber, right? For every 10 grams of fiber you add to your daily diet, you reduce your risk of all-cause mortality by 10%.
Damn.
Right? Up to about 45% or so. And then after that, the line starts flattening out, meaning you can't get to 100%. Yeah. But the average American eats around 8 grams of fiber.
8 grams?
8 grams of fiber.
Come on, guys.
Incidentally, right? This is accidentally, right? Just from stuff that they eat.
Give me a equivalent of what that is. Like, is that an apple? Is that a banana? Like, what is 8 grams of fiber?
Yeah, it's probably like a small bowl of broccoli.
No.
Yeah, like maybe a handful of lentils.
Okay.
And like maybe 4 carrots.
Wow.
It's nothing. Yeah. It's nothing. And here's the thing. If you take that 8 grams and you make it 18 grams, you've reduced your risk of mortality by 10%. If you take that 18 grams and make it 28 grams, you've reduced your risk of mortality by another 20%.
Do you know how many grams of fiber is in like a tablespoon of psyllium husk? Is there?
Yeah, it's about 6 grams or so.
Wow.
Right. So what I do, which is the simplest thing, right? So my goal is to reduce my risk of dying from stuff.
Yeah, I'm into it.
Simple.
Yeah,
right?
let's do it.
And improve resilience. things. And then we'll talk about utilization of fiber. That's also important. So I try to get about 40, 45 grams a day.
Okay.
I know that from a dietary perspective, it's hard to do that because you have to be quite measured. So I try to supplement about half of it.
Okay.
So how do I supplement half of it? Still good old psyllium husk, right? This organic India, simple. There's nothing in it.
Yeah, I have that one.
And it's not a great experience, because it doesn't taste like anything. You just mix it and chug it down. But I do about 2.5 tablespoons before each of my 2 largest meals.
Okay.
And that gives me about 10 grams each time.
Yeah.
So right there, I'm knocking out 20 grams of fiber for my daily diet.
Yeah.
Then the rest of the time, I'm eating lentils and beans and fruits and vegetables and all that. I'm easily getting another 20 grams. So I've knocked out about 40 grams of fiber each day pretty easily. The other benefit of doing the psyllium husk before the meal is it acts as your natural GLP-1 agonist, right? That's what fiber does. Yeah. So it slows down your gastric system. It makes you feel more full. It blunts that post-meal glucose curve. It triggers fat burning in your system by activating all these hormones, the satiety hormones. So it does wonderful things for you metabolically, but also it's saving your life down the road, right? Now, the beauty of fiber, and this goes back to the importance of the microbiome, it's so powerful. It can save your life. It can reduce your risk of mortality by 40, 45%, but we can't utilize it. We don't break down fiber. We don't get anything out of it, right? So how is this thing that we can't even break down and digest, how is this such a lifesaver? Because all of it goes to feed the microbiome. Right? All of it. And your microbes turn it into compounds that we need to survive. Like short-chain fatty acids. We talk about the acetate for the skin health, right? Butyrate for metabolic health, for your immune system. All of these things. And butyrate also helps with your brain. Propionate helps with the gut-brain axis and stress response. So, and then urolithins, right? So within fiber, I would also categorize polyphenols as really important, right? So polyphenols, this is another goal for people. Polyphenols are the colored parts of fruits and vegetables, right? If you can get a pound of berries of some sort a day, you're meeting most of your needs of polyphenols, right? And here's what they do for you. And a pound is not hard. So just think about cherries, blueberries, blackberries, and so on.
Yeah, I just throw them into my smoothie in the morning.
Totally. Yeah. It's so easy. And I have we always have a bowl of them sitting around the house, right? And if I feel snacky during the day, I'll just grab a handful of them and eat them, right? And some of them are bitter, so it gives you the bitters too. But here's what they're doing. We all know that we have these engines within our cells called mitochondria, right? Some cells have a few hundred, some cells have a few million, depending on the cells. The only cells that don't have them are your red blood cells because they're just carrying oxygen around. So the mitochondria will dictate how the cells function because they're the engines of the cell. And in fact, one of the best the best views of aging is something called the mitochondrial free radical theory of aging. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, but what that says effectively is that as the mitochondria is generating energy, ATP is the energy form, it also creates an exhaust. Just like your car creates an exhaust when it's burning fuel, right? So when your mitochondria is burning fuel to create energy, it creates an exhaust. The exhausts are called reactive oxygen species and oxidative stress. That exhaust ends up killing the cell and mitochondria if it's not quenched, right? And so the mitochondria over time gets damaged, just like your car engine gets damaged. And especially if you're not changing the oil and all that, right? So your mitochondria has a certain lifespan. And what your cells need to do is, number one, quench the exhaust as much as it can. Number two, as the mitochondria start to get damaged, it has to shut down that mitochondria and pull a new one out. Right? Or your cell's going to die, and then the organs that the cells make up will die.
Right.
So now you have to you have to save the mitochondria. We have a compound that circulates in our system called urolithin A. One of its roles is to rescue the dying mitochondria. And guess what? It's so important, we can't make it. We don't make this urolithin A. It doesn't come from our diet. Where do we get it? It's from bacteria in your gut, metabolizing polyphenols and converting it and producing it for us.
God, so complicated our bodies are.
It's crazy, right? So the engines of our cells, arguably the most important part of the cell, right, that allows us to function, requires this compound to fix the broken engines. We can't make this compound, nor do we get it from our diet. We're counting on bacteria in our gut to do it for us.
Right.
Talk about outsourcing critical functions,
Yeah.
right? Pair that with the in utero development of the brain I talked about earlier, and we really depend on the microbes, right? So then you talk about fiber utilization. If you went from 8 grams of fiber per day and you did 40 tomorrow, you're going to be really pissed off at everyone, right? Because you're not going to be utilizing it properly.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because the microbes that take the fiber and convert it to beneficial things are at such low levels because you haven't been eating enough fiber.
Most people say when they start to eat healthy, they're like, my gut just can't take it. Like I'm eating all these fruits, I'm eating all these vegetables, and my gut's unhappy, like as more unhappy than it was before.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's because of this.
It's because of this. So what's happening is you're not breaking down, your gut is not breaking down, your microbes are not breaking down the fiber appropriately, right? So then you might have some dysfunctional microbes that take over and start trying to break it down, but they produce gas or other inflammatory compounds instead of the beneficial stuff. So what you really need to do is introduce the fiber.
Yep.
With the right probiotic. This is where we've seen a massive difference in fiber utilization. So you take the spore-based probiotics, the Just Thrive probiotic, and you add it with a dose with every 10 grams of fiber that you add into your system, right? So let's say today you've standard American diet, I'm eating 8 grams of fiber incidentally. I'm going to go, okay, tomorrow I'm going to add 5 to 7 grams of additional fiber to my diet.
Right.
Make it a supplement, makes it easy. Do psyllium husk a tablespoon or so, but make sure you take your Spore probiotics with it because the probiotics will enhance the utilization of the fiber by the right bacteria. Right. And then the next day you do the same thing, do that for a week. And then the following week, add another 5 to 7 grams to that day.
How many grams of fiber should we be having in a day?
So we should everyone should be going for 40 to 50 grams
40
minimum.
to 50. Okay.
Yeah, minimum.
Everyone was setting you goals now. 40 to 50 grams of fiber.
And the average person is a fifth of the way there.
Wow.
Right? And remember, this is such a powerful compound. You get to 40 or 50, you're cutting your all-cause mortality by 40 to 50%.
There's one thing you take away from this, well, few. Bitters, fiber, and probiotics.
Spores.
Yeah, exactly.
Spore probiotics.
You spoke about leaky gut.
Yeah.
I would love to touch on that because I think there's so many things that are just going up and up, aren't there? And it's all the not great things, but leaky gut has become a big thing.
Yes.
What is it and how can people help to repair it? And if it's the same as what you've been speaking about, you can refer back to it. But what is leaky gut and how does it differ from something like IBS? How does someone know that they've got leaky gut versus something like IBS?
Yeah. I would say if you have any digestive issues at all, your gut is leaky. Right. So the leaky gut actually comes first often and precedes the digestive symptoms.
Right.
If you have allergies, asthma, immune issues, if you have anxiety, that's also tied to leaky gut. For example, the Netherlands did a study called the Netherlands Study on Anxiety and Depression. It was a 9-year-long study, a national study, because there's this epidemic of anxiety and depression going up. They're trying to figure out what is driving this, right? What they identified is leaky gut was the number one driver and number one predictor of anxiety and depression, right? And the reason for that, and here's why leaky gut actually causes all these problems and why it's leaky. So your gut is a very dynamic barrier, right? So your skin is a really firm barrier. It's like a brick wall. Nothing is supposed to get through, but your gut is more complicated than that because stuff is supposed to get through, right? So it's a selectively permeable barrier. You want nutrients to come through, but you don't want microbes and toxins to come through. So there's a few things that manage that selective permeability. Number one is a mucus layer that's sitting on your gut, right? That's supposed to trap stuff.
Yes.
And then within that mucus layer are immunoglobulins or antibodies.
Okay.
These antibodies are produced by immune cells, but the production of them are stimulated by bacteria. So you want adequate amount of antibodies in that mucus layer. So when things are trapped, the antibodies can sit on them and neutralize them so they don't cause a problem.
Okay.
In between the cells, the intestinal lining, there are these spaces called tight junctions, and there are proteins that manage that space so that they can open up when food's supposed to come through and nutrients supposed to come through, and they can cinch up when they don't want toxins and bacteria to come through. The expression of those tight junction proteins are also dependent on bacteria, right? And then finally, about 85% of things that get through the lining of the gut end up in the liver. So the liver has to deal with the toxicity of those things.
Right.
Now, liver is the liver is protected by the microbes in the gut.
Right.
Right. And so at the end of the day, the selective permeability of your gut lining is dictated heavily by the microbes in that space. And if the microbes become dismantled because of antibiotics, bad choices, stress, and all that, then those mechanisms that make the barrier selectively permeable fall apart. The barrier then becomes completely permeable.
Right.
Now, not only are nutrients coming through, but toxins and all that are leaking through as well. And the most sinister of all the toxins that leak through is something called LPS, lipopolysaccharide. It's actually generated in the gut because it's made by microbes in the gut.
Right.
But in a healthy system, it gets sequestered in that mucus lining, it gets neutralized by antibodies and so on. In an unhealthy gut, it leaks through and ends up in circulation. When it ends up in circulation, it triggers massive amounts of inflammation throughout the body. It can get to the joints, and in the joint trigger inflammation that eats away at the cartilage. It can get to the brain. In the deep recesses of the brain, it triggers inflammatory processes that creates neurodegeneration. It can interfere with serotonin and dopamine binding in the brain, so you end up with anxiety and depression. It can create inflammation in the skin so that you end up with dermatitis and acne.
Right.
So it's sinister. And when it's allowed to leak through, it creates havoc in the body. It creates something called chronic low-grade inflammation, right? There was a 2015 publication in Frontiers of Immunology, which was like it was almost like an opinion paper by a number of scientists that reviewed all the science around this.
Right.
And they basically concluded that the leakiness of the gut and the migration of this toxin, LPS, into circulation was the number one cause of mortality and morbidity worldwide.
Damn.
It's a number one cause of death, right? Why? Because it triggers all of these negative responses in the body. And when we did studies, for example, I published a paper on leaky gut endotoxemia in 2017. We took healthy, normal college students, if there is such a thing, as a healthy and normal college student, right?
Yeah.
But from a clinical definition, they were healthy normals, meaning they had no chronic diseases, they weren't on any medication, normal body weight, no symptoms of anything. 55% of them had severe leaky gut.
What?
To the point where it took their body 2 weeks to recover from the inflammation from a single meal.
No.
Right? That's how significant it can be. Now, they don't feel anything just yet. It's still what we would call subclinical.
Right.
But that happening over and over again, meal after meal, year after year,
wearing away at your body.
then it leads to degeneration that you start to feel in your early 30s and so on.
Oh my gosh, this is like such good information that everyone needs to know. And there's so much of it. I've got so many more questions for you, but I won't go into all of them. But
well, you did ask, how do you fix that, right?
Yes, how do you fix it?
It actually goes back to all the same things we've been talking about.
Okay, good.
The fiber, the probiotics, the prebiotics, like that is the core.
That's simple, actually.
It's so simple,
Yeah.
right? We published a study just on the probiotic alone in 2017. That was the first study I talked about. We just taking the probiotic without adjusting anything else in diet or stress and all that, we were able to reduce endotoxemia or leaky gut by 75%.
That's amazing.
Right, 73%.
And so can it heal by itself by doing these things? You don't necessarily...
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
okay,
yeah,
great.
Because it's the microbes that actually repair the space.
Right.
So you have to bring the microbes back and provide them the right tools.
Perfect. I wanted to move on to something that I noticed when I moved to the US.
Yeah.
A significant difference in my gut when I moved from the UK to the US. And, you know, a big part of that is the food systems and the regulations that exist here. But if someone can't move to Europe, what are they supposed to do? And how can they help protect themselves from the things that are on their fruits, their vegetables that they don't even realize?
Yeah, that one's really hard. And every little bit you minimize your exposure is very helpful.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So I want to give that to people because I don't want them to feel super anxious that they can't become completely holistic.
Yeah.
So number one, I would try to get as much of your produce as you can from farmers markets, right?
Yeah.
Like every city around here and even small towns on the weekends will have farmers markets. So as much as you can pick up your fruits, vegetables and all that from farmers markets, the better.
Right.
Because they have less of the pesticide residue and all that. We actually did a study with King's College in London on the impact of the pesticides that are regularly used here in the US. It's funny enough that we were trying to test this this, the pesticides, the Roundup versions of the pesticides, on what happens to a child's microbiome when they're exposed to what the US EPA designates as like safe levels, right? Yeah. And it was a 3-week-long study in a microbiome modeling system that used an actual child's microbiome. What we saw is that that's quote unquote safe level of exposure for 3 weeks. That child's microbiome, which was pristine, looked healthy, turned to the microbiome of someone that has inflammatory bowel disease in just that 3-week period. Right. And yes, it's an in vitro system, so it's probably accelerated, but you can just imagine day after day exposure to it. So as much as we can minimize our exposure, I would do that. Now, the counterbalance to that is the fiber, the prebiotics, and the spore-based probiotics. So if you cannot completely eliminate your exposure to those things, which most people can't, then you want to make sure you're taking these things that counterbalance the negative effect.
Okay. Does washing, obviously washing the fruits and the vegetables and even like removing the skins, do they just penetrate deeply into the vegetable though? With
some of the vegetables they do. Like things like tomatoes and all, they can penetrate a little bit deeper, which is actually a great reason to grow your own tomatoes.
Yeah.
Like a little tomato garden.
I'm growing some right now, actually.
Yeah. Tomatoes, cucumbers, right? Just grow some of that. Like the leafy greens, right? Spinach is easy to grow.
What about organic?
So organic also uses pesticides, right?
So sad.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yes, they may not be the same pesticides, but they do. And maybe for some people, I would say it's probably a slightly better type of pesticide that's used, but they do. So I don't want people to feel like, oh, I eat all organic, so I'm fine. Right?
Yes.
You're still eating food that has contamination in it, and you still want to try to wash your food. You still want to go to farmers markets as much as you can. And in fact, some frozen fruits and vegetables are actually really beneficial, right? So you can I've actually found, and I can't think of where we found this, but we found frozen fruits and vegetables that come frozen from overseas in places that they're grown where they don't use pesticides and all that, right? Now, the frozen aspect of it is important because it actually locks in the nutrition in the fruits and vegetables. So as much as you can try to do these things, they should try, but also know that your system can be resilient. Like you can fight back at it, right? You still want to eat your fruits and vegetables, even if you're going to end up eating
that's not an excuse, guys.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you don't want to be like, well, I might as well eat my Cheerios because I can't get.
Let's eat a pizza instead.
Exactly. Yeah. You still want to eat those. They still have nutritional value and benefit, but you want to just fight back against it by doing things that are deliberate, like your prebiotics, probiotics, and fiber.
Okay.
Right. And manage stress.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure you've seen that this is the era of the extreme amount of protein in our diets at the moment. Wanted to touch on that and get your opinion on whether extreme amounts of protein messes your gut up, and also what sources of protein, because I'll speak for myself as a vegan. A lot of the protein powders are made from pea protein.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of people when they're trying to switch or go from being someone who does take whey to come into taking vegan protein powders, they struggle a little bit with how it affects their gut.
Yep.
So I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah. So, we overcorrect all the time, right? On trends, and then we overcorrect. The protein thing is it's generally okay. I would rather people are focused on trying to get protein into their diet than eating other nonsense, right?
Yes.
So that's fine. But here's a really, really important piece of the message. We already talked about the average American eats 8 grams of fiber a day, right? Which is nothing. And then the average American incidentally is getting around 20 grams of protein. So they're already a 3-to-1 ratio.
Right.
Then if you take that average person and they're like, oh my God, I heard on this thing that I need to get 1 gram per pound, and they're like a 150-pound person. Now they're pushing to try to get 150 grams a day, right? Yeah. But they're still at 8 grams of protein, right?
So fiber,
fiber, sorry. So now they're like a 20-to-1 ratio, which is even worse. So what happens in that case? So in your gut, you've got 2 big types of fermentation that occur.
Right.
One is called proteolytic and the other one's called saccharolytic, right? Proteolytic fermentation is often done when you have a lot of protein coming in. And you can only break down and assimilate a certain amount of that protein. A lot of it will end up going to your gut microbes, and they will break it down and ferment it.
Right.
Now, that can be okay, but if you have too much proteolytic fermentation, they also create inflammatory byproducts,
Right.
like compounds called P-cresol, for example, or ammonia becomes a negative byproduct of proteolytic fermentation. So what you don't want is you don't want too much proteolytic fermentation. You want saccharolytic fermentation, which is where you convert plant-based materials, fibers, and all that to short-chain fatty acids, urolithins, all these things we talked about, right? So then if you go really crazy in the protein and you're not balancing it out with fiber, then you're going to drive your gut towards proteolytic fermentation. And although you might get some benefit from the protein, you're still going to produce those inflammatory compounds that will wreck your gut over time.
Yep.
And then keep in mind the keystone species we talked about, they don't eat protein. They need fiber. They need polyphenols. They need plant-based materials. So you're not feeding your keystone species over time, right? So to me, if you want to build muscle, which is great, you want to get your resistance training in, all fantastic. You want to get enough protein, you've got to balance it out with fiber. If you're doing 100 grams of protein, you better be doing 50 grams of fiber with it. Right? So do them together, have some balance. Try not to go too much further than a 2-to-1 ratio.
Okay, that makes sense. I have some specific questions I asked some of my community about questions they had about the gut. And so these might be faster answers that you have for them. But someone asked, why does animal protein upset my gut so much?
Yeah. So it has a completely different type of amino acid profile. And for a lot of people, it's less accessible, right? Because you have to chop it down. So if you think about a muscle, a chicken breast, right? Chicken breast is a muscle. It's similar to the muscle in your arm, for example. In that form, it is a very complicated tertiary, which is a 3-dimensional folding of protein chains.
Okay.
So in order for us to actually utilize that chicken breast, it has to go into the gut. We have to first chew it, so we break it down a little bit, goes into the gut, and then stomach acid and enzymes have to attack it and unfold a 3-dimensional structure into a 2-dimensional structure, and then string it out like a string of pearls, and then chop up that string of pearls to individual pearls. Right?
So your gut needs to be real strong to be doing that.
It has to be real strong to do that. So what happens if you don't do that adequately? You get undigested components of protein, and then it ferments. And in fact, protein fermentation is actually called putrefaction.
Yeah, it's really gross when people have...
You can smell it.
Yeah, I was going to say,
And so in order to properly utilize animal-based proteins in the form of chicken and steak and so on, you have to have a healthy digestive system. You have to be able to break it down and assimilate it. It's less accessible that way.
That makes sense.
So you want to make sure your digestive system is healthy to handle it.
Why does coffee upset the stomach, and what's a better option, especially if I'm having it early in the morning?
Yeah. So coffee triggers something called peristalsis. That's the bowel movements, similar to how magnesium would do that, right? So for some people, like for me, coffee is like an amazing regulatory switch, right? I wake up in the morning, I have a sip of coffee. I know within minutes I'm going to the bathroom and I'm having my morning amazing defecation.
My friend, every time he comes to stay here, he's like, please, can you make sure you've got coffee? Because I need that to make sure I'm regular. So
Now, for some people who have an overreactive neurological system in their gut, so the gut is covered with this system. It's your neurological system that covers the entire digestive tract, right? It's the second most dense nerve endings compared next to your brain. You have even more nerve endings in your gut than you do in your spinal cord, right? So people with IBS or irritable bowel or tendency for IBS have overactive nerve spasms. And so then their gut's like they compress and spasm all the time. That's why they feel urgency, cramping, bloating, and all that, right? It's actually a gut-brain issue. So when they have coffee, it just amplifies that nervous twitching of their neurological system.
Right.
So for them, they have to be really careful. For those individuals, what I would actually do is if you want to have coffee still because you need the energy, it alerts you, it wakes you up, I would wake up in the morning. Before having coffee, I would have some fiber. I would have some soluble fiber, like a psyllium husk, that actually slows down all of those nerve signals, right? And then you can have coffee, and that should alleviate some of that kind of spasmodic effect.
That's a really good tip. Rather than saying don't drink coffee, you've got another option.
Yeah.
You've been inside of the health industry for decades now. And what would you say is the biggest lie that Big Pharma has sold us about our health?
The biggest lie is that...
Or one of them.
I'm just trying to think like what? There's so many. Yeah, the biggest lie is, to me, this idea that your system, when you have disease, right? When you have a chronic condition, whatever it may be, that there's a default within your system that has to be corrected with certain interventions and medical interventions, right? Like your body has all the ability it needs to heal.
Yeah.
You have to put it in the right state to heal, right? It cannot heal in the wrong state. And so... And there's plenty of need for interventional medicine. If I get in a car wreck, take me to the ER so they can put me back together, right? It's and acute medicine is really advanced and fantastic in many ways. But when we think about chronic disease, we're thinking about your system is dysfunctional in a way that we need to intervene with compounds that disrupt pathways and all that. That's a wrong way of looking at it, right? The question should be, what is not happening in your body that's leading to this dysfunction? And in so many ways, it could be a simplest answer, right? We talked about anxiety, for example, right? We have an epidemic of anxiety. And you look at somebody that's really anxious and has a really hard time getting through the day, right? And you go, well, that's imbalance in their brain chemistry. That was the old thinking. And so let's give them an SSRI. So it unusually increases serotonin in their brain and so on. That is a meddling with the normal system that doesn't actually work. What they really have is likely something like leaky gut. They probably just need some fiber. They need to adjust their diet. They need to do some meditation. They need to bring their body back to a state in which it can heal itself.
Yeah, I was just speaking to a friend actually recently who she's been struggling a lot with, depression and mood disorders, and she got put on a depression medication. And she said, they told me there were going to be some side effects, but it's so sad that you have to battle these. And then she tried it for a couple of days and the side effects were everything from like taste loss, like memory, brain fog stuff, only within literally a couple of days, sleep issues. And it's just sad when you have to balance something with something else. It's like, okay, I'm getting rid of this, but then I feel numb and then I get all this other stuff. So which one is the less? It's so hard for people to be in that position where they're saying, okay, well, I guess I have to compromise on my sleep because this medication affects that, but then it's going to make me feel a little bit better in mood. It's just, it's a really sad balance that people have to work through.
And I would say I would refine my message even a little bit more, right? So I think one of the biggest downsides of how the pharmaceutical industry and let's say conventional medicine has approached this idea of health is it's stripped hope from people, right? By making you feel that there's a inherent dysfunction in your system that needs like intervention. Right? And this whole issue of evidence-based medicine. We're conflating evidence-based medicine with regular natural practices. And you cannot do that, right? So yes, if you develop a small molecular drug that's supposed to fix something or change something, you need a lot of evidence that small molecule is going to do that thing, right? Because that's the first time you're introducing that molecule into the human system. You have no idea where else it's going to do things, how else it's going to affect the system. So you need what we call evidence-based medicine. You need all the randomized controlled trials, safety studies and all that. But you don't need that for walking. You don't need evidence for meditation. You don't need evidence for sleep. You don't need evidence for a healthy diet, right? But we've conflated the two because you'll talk to a cardiologist and they'll say, okay, your best way of reducing your heart disease risk if you have family history and elevated cholesterol and all that is you take a drug, a statin, right? Or a number of drugs. But then what do you say? Well, what if I just exercise and ate healthy and lost some weight and all that? They'll be like, well, this has trials on it. This one doesn't have as many trials. I'm like, well, but you don't need trials for those practices because those are just regular old, traditional practices with lots of empirical evidence, right? So I think the big issue is empirical evidence versus clinical evidence, right? We shouldn't conflate the two. They have two different spaces. in our world, right? Food practices, all of that is
they don't have to conflict. They can work together.
They can work together, right? Like, do I need to have a study to know that if I drink water, it's going to alleviate my dehydration?
No.
Right? No, it's pretty simple. It's pretty understood. And humans have been doing it for millennia, right? Do I need really good clinical evidence to think that this compound is going to alleviate some process? Like, well, I've never had this compound. It's never been in our system, right? So that's the part I think that really, and the problem with that is the doctors are at that intersection.
Yes.
Right? Because the vast majority of people still count on their doctors for their health and their wellness, right?
Yeah.
And the wellness part of it is even just kind of a misnomer in that case, but they count on them for their health. And doctors are trained on this evidence-based medicine approach.
Yes.
They are not trained on the empirical evidence approach, right? And because they're not trained on the empirical side, they don't know anything about how the empirical side affects their patients.
Right.
All they know is the small molecular evidence-based approach. And so it creates this push and pull complication, right? Where it's like, well, my doctor said this, they don't really know about this, and then I'm hearing this online. It's like,
it's too hard for people.
So hard for people,
One of the funniest things is slightly off topic. One of the funniest things is when you watch those ads for medications on TV, and then at the end it's like, and then it will also cause this blindness and stomach issues, and you might die in a year. And it's like,
all the list.
Really quickly, I want to touch on supplements because I think what people get used to doing, and I was a culprit of this, you kind of end up taking supplements like multivitamins, this, and you just stay on them for long periods of time. And you don't think about whether you have to switch them out or change them or anything. What is your view on supplement cycling? And, should people be really figuring out what their needs are before they just start popping supplements?
100%. Yeah. So to me, supplements are exactly that. They should be supplemental to a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right? Where you can't get enough of a natural thing, you should be taking it as a supplement. That's why I said fiber. I supplement about half of it and I get the rest of it from my diet because I want to make sure I'm hitting my 40 to 50 grams, right? Yeah. Probiotics, so the spores are a great example. Now, if we all left our modern lifestyles and went and live on the side of the mountain, ate dirt and all that, we wouldn't need the probiotic anymore, right? But since we don't have exposure to them anymore and we know exposure to them is critical, I say supplement with that, right? Prebiotics, because we're not eating the rind of fruits. We're not eating the fiber within the fruits. We're not eating the skin, which is where you find a lot of these prebiotics. Then you have to supplement with it, right? Because we're not getting enough of it. And so generally, my view is you have to create the right foundation of a diverse diet, a whole food diet, exercise, meditation, mindfulness work, all of those things, cleaning up your environment a little bit, reducing the toxicity of your personal care products and the environment around you, and then find foundational things to add to your supplementation. Right? Prebiotics, probiotics, fiber, certain vitamins, if you're not getting enough of it, like vitamin K2, for example, is critical for your overall health, but we get almost none of it because most of it comes from certain types of fermented foods, right? It's critical for bone health, for nerve health, for brain health, for your cardiovascular health, but we get very little of it because we don't eat organs, we don't eat brains, we don't eat really awful fermented foods like natto, right? Fermented soybeans. So that is a supplement. So what I would always encourage people is don't look at supplementation as a crutch to the proper healthy foundation. Set up the healthy foundation first and then supplement in certain foundational things that you just need and cannot get through the natural process.
Thank you so much. You were not lying when you said that this was going to be the best gut health podcast that I was ever going to hear. This was honestly phenomenal. I'm such a geek for this stuff. And I feel like you've answered literally every question, but I'm sure we could do another podcast episode and I have so much more to talk to you about.
Absolutely. I would welcome coming back.
Thank you.
It's beautiful out here. And thank you so much for having me. And I want one last message for people is that, they have a lot more control over their outcomes than they think. Right? Basic, lots of small decisions throughout the day, what you put in your body, what you put on your body, who you surround yourself with. It's all you. And all of those add up to really powerful outcomes.
You're so right.
And so I want people to not feel hopeless. I want them to feel not feel lost. And I also don't want them to feel like completely confused by every biohacking thing and all that they see that they think think they need to do.
Yes.
Right? It's really just the foundation.
With the simples.
Just keep it simple.
Yeah, I agree. I think a big part of this podcast is to help people to take their health back into their own hands. And I really believe that from the moment I felt in power of my health and being able to say no to things, even if people recommended it, by being able to say, no, I believe my body can fight this. I believe my body has everything that it needs, and nature has everything that it needs around me to help heal my body. It fully transformed. My immunity got better. My digestion got better. Like every part of my physical and mental health changed when I felt like I was in power of my own body. And I think that's something all people need is the right information, which I feel like you've really shared today. And it's so simple, but we should all just do a little 30-day trial of trying all these things and see how much better you feel. And it takes such a short period of time of doing the wrong things our whole life. All you need to do is commit to something for a short period to really see the benefit. And then you just want to keep going with it anyway.
Yep. Yeah, because you'll feel that resilience, you'll feel that reward. And like you said, I challenge people for 30 days, increase your fiber intake by 4 to 5 grams each week.
Let's go.
For the daily diet, get some prebiotics in and get your spores in.
Yes.
And you'll see how you change in 30 days.
I'm doing it.
Change yourself. Yeah.
Are you all doing it? You better be. Oh, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.